Things have changed a lot since I was in college. There were no ways available for many families to provide for their kids' higher education. Now the Steve Beeman Group can give you the information necessary to meet this important challenge. Once again, let's join Steve.
Perhaps second only to providing retirement security and a financial plan, our concern as adults is centered on providing for our children's educations. This is a driving force behind many people's financial plans, and it's so important that we thought it necessary to devote a full session to college funding. As we all know, college costs have risen much faster than our incomes over the past 20 or 30 years. I mean, when I went to Purdue University, my total annual cost for tuition and room and board was around $5,000. Today, tuition, room, and board are more like $17,000. That's over a 300% increase. I doubt seriously that your income is up over 300% since 1980. In 1980, the average American income was $19,000. Today, it's $46,000. So our incomes are up, yes, by over 200%, but college costs have risen by much more. We're not going to explore why this has happened, but we're going to try to put some ideas on how to deal with it. First, let's begin by discussing the fact that today, unlike 30 years ago, there are options available for students that were not there in 1980. Primarily among them is online college and university. We've conducted SBGcast on online schooling, and we've explored its viability in today's world. This new model of schooling, especially at the undergraduate level, has created a new form of competition for traditional universities. But we haven't seen this affect prices yet. Okay, let's start at the beginning of this. The basic planning process is as simple as this. How much does it cost? How long until we get there? And how much can we put aside each period? And finally, how much can we earn on investment returns? Okay, that's simple enough. But let's put a real-world example to this. The average family's income, as we've discussed, is around $65,000. Well, after tax, that's around $58,000 or $4,800 per month. From that, all deductions are made for housing, transportation, food, etc. Now, the average family spends about $4,000 per month on those things. So as you can quickly see, things are very tight. Here's a quick breakdown, and by the way, this data comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. On average, that family earns $65,000 a year. They pay $6,500 in taxes, and that does include the Make Work Pay credit of $800, by the way. They spend $5,400 a year on food, $13,000 on housing, $7,300 on transportation, $2,400 on medical care, $4,500 on their pensions and Social Security, and another $15,400 on clothing and the like. That nets around $10,500. So let's continue for a moment. If our two children are 10 years old and 8 years old, let's assume. So we have 8 years and 10 years respectively before they enter college, and we need to start participating in funding. Here are further choices that relate to your specific situation. Does your child intend to go to a public or private university? In-state or out-of-state? Do you have access to high-quality local community colleges? Would you consider online college? Each of these questions dramatically affects your cost. As I indicated earlier, a current charge for an in-state resident at Purdue University is approximately $17,500. If you're a resident of, say, Illinois, and you want your child to attend Purdue, you can increase that to around $25,000 per year. If you intend to send your child to a private college, you'll hit anywhere from $30,000 per year to over $50,000 per year. So let's just say, for example's sake, that our average American family with the average of 2 children and an average income of $65,000 is able to retain $10,000 in retained earnings. Now that's very good, and it would require a significant amount of self-discipline, but it is doable. So here's the math for sending Susie and Billy to college. Total cost is 2 kids times 4 years times $17,500 per year, or $140,000. Let's assume further that Susie and Billy's parents want some semblance of a chance to retire someday and not always have the pressure of a 9-to-5 job hanging over their heads. So they followed our advice and they put $6,500 of their $10,000 away for themselves. That leaves $3,500 as the maximum they could contribute per year to their children's college cost. Well, let's continue with the math. Over the next 14 years, remember, Billy enters in 10 years and in theory should be there for only 3 or 4 years. So we'll contribute over the next 14 years a total of $3,500 times 14 years or $49,000. That leaves us $90,000 short. Ouch. What do we do? Well, here's what we do. Number one, don't just let the money sit somewhere earning zero. In future sessions, we'll explore how to invest, but for now, let's just assume we can get an average market return of 8%. Remember from earlier discussions that the tax man likes to come and nibble at everything you earn. So for this purpose, you should consider a 529 savings plan. Most states now offer these 529 plans, and they allow you to first deduct contributions, which is immediate savings, and then defer taxes until withdrawal. Okay, if we do this, our $49,000 would now grow to be worth almost $90,000. With this information calculated in, we find that in aggregate, paying 100% of both of our children's tuition, we will either have to raise our returns to 18.5% a year, which will cover it, or we have to secure scholarships, loans, and grants to cover the balance. Or, a novel idea in today's world perhaps, our kids might have to work and kick in some of their own. Now, we've done some SBG casts on the idea of online college. In some ways, the jury is out on whether or not these are the best alternative. But given that a student can live at home, they are typically much less expensive. The University of Phoenix, for example, would cost somewhere around $6,000 or $7,000 for tuition based on a host of information, including your area of degree and how you intend to complete your program online or at their physical campuses. Community colleges also run a competitive method, especially for the first 2 years. The College of DuPage, for example, runs at the rate of $120 per credit hour, or what would equate to $3,400 per year. Depending, of course, on the student, this can be a significantly beneficial way to gain experience at the college level. I can't speak for all community colleges, but the College of DuPage offers associate degree programs in a wide variety of curriculum. So we have 3 options really for post-secondary education: traditional universities, online colleges and universities, or community colleges. In terms of funding that can be received from other sources other than our own retained earnings or our children's earnings, there are a number of scholarship programs that should be explored. Now, let's be honest. There are literally thousands of scholarships available for men and women entering college. They're so numerous, in fact, that I couldn't begin to mention them all here. But suffice it to say, scholarships are available for every major, for every situation, and for every school. The internet is loaded with resources to help you find the appropriate scholarships for your kids. After scouring the world for scholarships, which range, by the way, from $50 to over $30,000 a year, you have to shift into grants and loans to finish out the funding requirements. Now, in this area, there have been some substantive changes with new laws passed by Congress this past year. First, the popular Pell Grant program has been expanded, which raises the amount of the grant to over $5,000 per year. Now, the Pell Grant is a needs-based program and is specifically designed to serve low-income people. For most Americans then unable to receive a Pell Grant, consideration must be made to secure a student loan. Prior to this year's legislation, student loans were handled by private institutions, but guaranteed by government funds, so that if the student failed to pay, the lending institution was made whole. As part of the health care reform legislation, a rider was added to that eliminated private institutions from participating in the student loan programs that moved that now to the full responsibility of the federal government. Through the Federal Direct Lending Program, the federal government now offers loans with typically lower interest rates than you'll find in the normal private loans. However, and keep this in mind, school is expensive, and if the student gets overloaded in debt and cannot keep their heads above water, they cannot declare bankruptcy on federal student loans. These loans hold the same status as tax liability and will not be discharged in a bankruptcy court. The final option is a private loan made by a bank or other financial institution. In today's lending environment, only the absolutely best customers will be able to secure a signature loan, as we've discussed in earlier sessions. But rather, most of us will need to secure a loan with a mortgage on our home or other asset. So our couple with 2 children, as we mentioned above, looking to close that $50,000 gap in funding, we offered these options. 1, increase the rate of return from the investments. 2, have the students work. 3, have the students earn a scholarship. 4, attend an alternative school for the first 2 years, perhaps an online school or community college. 5, if your income is low enough, and average incomes, by the way, don't hit that requirement, apply for a Pell Grant. And finally, be prepared to borrow the funds either through the Federal Direct Lending Program or your private bank. A key factor in successfully helping your children through college is to begin your planning early. Stick with it and make sure you do fund the program, smartly managing your own investments. And consider alternatives for reducing the cost or finding new money. And finally, perhaps you'll have to borrow the money. Friends, if you do the pure math, I'm hard-pressed to believe that economic benefit is maximized by spending $90,000 on school and leaving with $50,000 in debt. I'm not proposing that a young person not go to college, but perhaps it's worth thinking about ways to minimize its effect. In our example above, one of the students of this family elected not to attend college, but rather to invest the $70,000, and subsequently they earned 8% per year on average. Well, that student who didn't go to college but invested the cost, that student would have $2 million saved up by the age of 65. If his sibling chose to attend university, let's say the last 2 years, but community college the first 2 years, that person would have $750,000 saved up in addition to a degree of their choosing. I throw these numbers out to make a point as much as anything. College is a choice. Granted, it helps grease the skids for fulfilling careers, and the evidence is overwhelming that it does lead to higher incomes. However, we should look at it not as a situation that we need to do just because everyone else does it. We need to have this discussion with our children and help them understand the economic impact of the decision to attend college. This isn't free. Attending a 4-year degree program will cost someone $2 million over the course of their life. Perhaps that knowledge will increase the awareness of our students on the importance of taking it seriously, not simply making a party out of it.
It is frightening to realize just how much a full education costs in the U.S. Steve is confident that what you have just heard can at least give you the tools to plan effectively for your family's higher education needs. And now, let's go to 2 areas of great concern to you, me, and the entire country: Medicare and Social Security. While both of these programs are entitlements, there are nonetheless many changes that have occurred and will continue to occur with both of these programs for older Americans. Steve will begin with a little history and will then get into more detail.
I am often asked why I don't discuss politics in these financial literacy programs. The reason, my friends, is that until we share a foundation of knowledge, discussing policy implications serves just no purpose. So I try, as hard as that may sometimes be, to keep my opinions to myself and focus on providing only facts. With that said, though, a question is so frequently asked of me that I felt compelled to do my utmost best to answer it. And my answer most certainly will get into policy implications and politics, because the nature of the question in and of itself is largely contingent on politics. That question, which affects each and every American, is the future of Social Security and Medicare sound enough that I should plan on receiving that as part of my overall financial plan? I want to first express my gratitude to those who have asked this for sending me such a softball question, one that's so easily answered. We don't need a lot of background, but here's a little to set a framework for the answer. Most of us alive today don't have firsthand memories of the Great Depression. But if we talk to those who do and read newspapers from the era, which I have, you gain a quick sense of a nation gone awry, a nation searching for its soul. We had unemployment rates approaching 25% and natural disasters like the Great Dust Bowl that just seemed to hit one right after the other. During the midst of this, there was real talk of revolution. Europe was in turmoil, so much so that in Germany, the citizens elected a relatively unknown but very powerful orator to the highest office in the land, Adolf Hitler. It is in the throes of this mess that our federal government voted to implement the Social Security system. This was created as a basic insurance program that would provide a minimum safety net for Americans who were disabled or who had achieved the ripe old age of 65. This was never intended to be a welfare program. In fact, quite the contrary. All working Americans were mandated to contribute to this insurance fund, and the maximum contribution was limited to an amount that represented the maximum benefit that could accrue. The initial contribution limit that was set by the Act was $3,000 in annual income, and a tax on that of 3%. Since then, that contribution rate has gone to 12.4%, and the maximum annual cap has risen from $3,000 to over $100,000. So, given those numbers, the original maximum tax or contribution was $90 per year. Today, the maximum contribution in Social Security taxes stands at $13,144 per year. Now, it's important to note that this remains a universal social insurance program. There is no means testing to Social Security, meaning that regardless of your income or assets, if you paid in, you receive back your money plus some interest. That is the primary reason Social Security receives such a wide base of support in America. It may not be pretty, but to most people, it's fair, if there is such a thing. There's another very important key point that must be understood with respect to Social Security. When it was implemented in the 1930s, the average lifespan for a working adult was, guess what, 65, and that's when benefits kicked in. And there was a survivor's benefit attached, so if the husband worked and paid in, then died at 65, his spouse would get the benefit. Although let's bear in mind, his spouse's lifespan wasn't much more. The problem we have with Social Security today is founded on very real changes. First, people live longer. The life expectancy now for a man is over 72 years and a woman almost 80. This has put a huge stress on the system because it was never intended to last that long after a person quit working, period. The second problem is that now we're beginning to see the retirement age hitting the baby boomers. This simply means that the huge workforce that had been paying for a lesser number of retirees is now themselves retiring, and they have to be paid for by the lesser number of workers following them in the system. The third and final nail in the coffin is that where the Social Security program was funded in a trust to be invested in marketable securities, the federal government played a Ponzi scheme of the worst order on the American people. Rather than investing in marketable securities, and as we've discussed, since 1937, they've returned an average of 6% a year for a very conservatively managed portfolio. Well, the government created a new series of U.S. Treasury bonds that pays more like 2%. And the Social Security Trust invested all of its assets in those bonds. Now, this, of course, served to let Washington continue to assuage its ravenous appetite to spend money, but it created a situation where there is no trust fund. This would be similar to a private insurance company setting up a life insurance program, but instead of investing the money in liquid marketable securities like stocks and bonds, they invested the money in special bonds created by their own company and then went on to spend the money as they pleased. The bottom line, when benefits need to be paid, there's no money to pay them. If this were done in private business, the executives would be in prison. But in Washington, otherwise known as the Land of Oz, all they do is raise taxes to keep funding payouts. Since there is no trust and they require cash, current employees and workers paying in are directly paying for retirees who are drawing out. Well, here's the problem with that. Since there is no reserve fund, fewer current workers are paying for an increasing number of retirees. This inversion of the system was expected to cause a situation where more money was paid out than was taken in. But the experts forecasted that that would happen in 2030, then 2020. Well, folks, here's some reality time. According to a recent article in the New York Times, that inversion happened this year. This is part of the figure you hear when economists speak of an unfunded mandate when discussing the U.S. debt. Our current U.S. stated debt is just over $13 trillion. The liability presently in place for Social Security is an additional, yes, additional $14 trillion. Now, bear in mind what that $14 trillion represents. This is akin to a life insurance company with annuity contracts in place totaling $14 trillion. If that company had assets sufficient to pay the liability and income sufficient to replenish its assets, you'd not panic. But this company, that is Social Security, has no assets. Okay, yes, it does. It has special government bonds, but the government can't redeem those for cash. No way. Okay, what about income to replenish the fund? Well, here, this company is losing money every year. It was supposed to generate positive cash flow until at least 2016. But as I've said, according to the New York Times, it went upside down this year. So now it has not the income to replenish it, nor the assets to replenish it. So the multi-trillion-dollar question is, what does this really mean? What does this really mean to you and to me? Okay, now I'm purely speculating here because predicting the future is difficult and predicting Washington is impossible. There are likely outcomes to fix Social Security, and my bet is that we'd fix it rather than break it. I believe it still does represent the third rail of American politics, and it will increasingly be so as baby boomers begin to receive their checks. After all, even if we don't believe in government subsidizing people, well, that Social Security money, that's ours, right? And people aren't going to give that up so quickly. So here is my prognostication of what will likely happen to Social Security in the relatively near term. That is, say, the next 5 years. So work your age forward and you'll see where that hits you. Number one, I believe that there could be a solid argument made to extend the retirement age from 65 to, say, 70. After all, this was never intended to kick in when you had so many years to live. Extending the retirement age from 65 to 70 would significantly reduce the outflow burdens on the cash situation. The second thing that will likely happen is Washington will either take the income cap off altogether, as they did with Medicare, or raise the cap from the current $106,000 to, say, $250,000. That's a big tax increase. Finally, as has already partly been done, they'll eliminate the ability to draw Subchapter S Corporation and LLC distributions without paying payroll taxes. Taken in combination, these fixes would shore up Social Security for a long time to come. I do not believe they'll means test the program. This would make it a welfare program rather than an insurance program and would raise a huge stink, even if most people fell under the limit. To means test it, you'd have to say, for example, everyone making more than $30,000 in retirement didn't get their Social Security benefits. Well, an awful lot of people would be upset by that, and they'd vote people out of office. So I don't believe means testing will happen. Now let's touch on the biggest and baddest program around, Medicare. A little background here. Medicare was put in place in 1965 as an extension of the Social Security system. Like Social Security, this program kicked in at age 65 and provided for medical care at a basic level for all Americans. When it started, Medicare was estimated to have a maximum expenditure cap of $10 billion. That's $10 billion all told full in by 1990. Well, today, I'm almost sorry to be the bearer of this news. The current unfunded liability for Medicare, remember our insurance company example for Social Security? Well, for Medicare, our company has a liability on its balance sheet of, you ready for this? $76 trillion. To put in perspective how badly government economists misestimated that cost, I want to read a passage from the Heritage Foundation. In 1965, as Congress considered legislation to establish a national Medicare program, the House Ways and Means Committee estimated that the hospital portion of the program, Part A, would cost about $9 billion annually by 1990. Actual spending of Part A in 1990 was $67 billion. That actuary who provided the original cost estimates acknowledged in 1994 that even after conservatively discounting for the unexpectedly high inflation rate of the early 1970s and other factors, the actual experience was 165% higher than the estimate. I brought this to your attention to alert you to the facts. As I said, I think we could deal with Social Security, but we cannot deal with Medicare. And the new health insurance initiative put in place that was originally estimated by the Congressional Budget Office at $700 billion has already been extended by the CBO to over $1 trillion. Now, again, it's beyond the purpose of financial literacy to say whether or not these programs are good or not. That's your call. But speaking purely on the fact, I can say this. The only way we pay a $76 trillion bill for Medicare is to, wow, I can't even think of a good response to that. I guess we could means test. Oh, wait, we already do for Medicare. We could raise taxes. Well, the Medicare tax has already been raised from 2.9 to 3.5 in the new legislation, and that won't make a dent. To fix this, we'd have to raise tax rates so high it would serve to stagnate the economy. Well, how about inflation? Okay, but look out. To pay off that much would require staggeringly high inflation. Grow the economy? Yes, that's a solution. But how do you grow the economy when you have to increase taxes so much? So, okay, I admit it. On the Medicare program, I'm stumped, and I won't deny it. I don't know how to fix this except just to dismantle it. We can't keep playing the game. At some point, we'll just add more and more to the unfunded liabilities, and that will break the balance sheet. At some point, my friends, Medicare will break. Just as the tech stock bubble broke in the late 1990s and the mortgage bubble popped in 2008, this Medicare bubble will pop too. It must. During the course of this session, we touched on the basic laws of economics, and one of them is debt must be repaid, either by inflation or by hard assets or by something. Debt must be repaid. Now, the only alternative is the U.S. defaults. But to whom? To ourselves? I mean, I won't lie, this default idea has been discussed, and I'm not sure anyone really understands the impact on the U.S. or the global economy. In history, when nations faced this much debt to others, they devalued their currency to pay other countries back. The nightmare scenario, of course, is the German situation of the 1920s. Faced with reparations to the European victors of World War I, they experienced a total collapse of their currency, and that led to a big problem. The difference here is we owe this money to ourselves. I don't want to beat this to death. I believe you have a fairly good understanding of the enormity of the problem. All I can say with certainty is this will lead to chaos, period. But I urge you not to put your head in the sand on this one. The entire premise of the Steve Beeman Group is to empower you with knowledge and resources to build a life that you deserve, built on the stability of the 5 paths. I believe that dealing with this problem head-on, focused on the financial path, will require you and me to be stronger than ever on our emotional, physical, intellectual, and spiritual paths.
What you have learned from this is, yes, you and I will probably be collecting Social Security and Medicare. But depending on your age, these programs will change in the future, as they already have in the past. It is our job at the Steve Beeman Group to inform and educate so that you can plan appropriately for the future.